start recording now. And I'm also going to share our norms, which are in the chat. So PL on the Go was conceived back when we began our extended closure as a way to connect educators for short learning opportunities of about an hour long on everything from mindfulness and meditation to writing and education, which I'm honored that you're here joining me today. And so these sessions are meant to help us fulfill both goals for the day-to-day work we do, as well as our own personal and professional goals. And the structure is really informal. We assume that everybody is here to learn and learn together. We share that, we have our own expertise, but no one is an expert, and that we recognize that we're here to be participants. Some of you certainly are more comfortable with turning on your camera than others, and that's totally fine. But we want everyone to be comfortable being involved and engaged while you're here. So if that sounds good, we'll get rolling. And for those of you who I don't have the pleasure of knowing, my name is Fred Endy. I'm the Director of Curriculum for Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES in Yorktown Heights here in New York. And along with being an educator, a father, a husband, kind of like a science geek, I'm also a writer. Writing is something that is part of who I am. It's something that when I haven't been able to engage in it, I have felt like a part of me is missing. And so it was important to me that as I engaged and continued my career as an educator, that I'd be able to continue writing. I haven't felt whole if I haven't been able to write, on a regular basis. So I'm going to share my screen with you all because I want to share a little bit about kind of my writing story, and then we'll take some time to actually do some writing together. So let me open this up. And so let me slide this over here. So I'm also a big fan, I think there's value in providing not only doing some sharing and experiencing things together, but also some resources that might be of interest. So there are so many different slide decks that are out there, right? This one comes courtesy of a site called Slides Carnival. And if you're ever looking for really good slide decks that are also free, right, that you don't have to pay for, imagine that. Slides Carnival is awesome. And I'll put the Slides Carnival, okay, would be what you would search for. And they have so many templates that it's really hard to not find something that fits the theme. They provide the templates as PowerPoint templates or as copies into Google Slides. So depending on how you're putting your presentation together, you have multiple options to do that. So I want to share a little bit about my own journey, and then talk with you a little bit about some ways to think about your own writing. And so for me, my journey started really early. These are two examples of my writing from elementary school. The one on the left was part of a series of stories. We had to write newspaper articles. I can't remember what grade it was in, but clearly, so that would have been, it looks like either third or fourth grade based on the year, but clearly, I was a bit of a National Enquirer fan, I guess, based on the title. And then the one to the right was, I was creating a map for a video game. I was a gamer as a kid back like on ColecoVision and Atari, and then still am when time allows. And you have to you have to be able to tell a story in your writing too, right? I think any for me, part of the fun, so there are two things that are really kind of intriguing about writing. One is the ability to reflect on our experiences. And for me, I sometimes can do that well through speaking, but a lot of times I do it even better writing it down. And the second piece is telling a compelling story. You know, reflecting is really important for each of us, but as a species, we're just kind of intrigued by the stories people have to tell, and we all have really great stories to share. And so, finding a way to get them out there is awesome. And Megan, thanks for sharing in the chat the slides carnival details and connections. So much appreciated there. So and for me, my writing started early, and then I went through a phase probably in at the end of high school and college where I didn't write as much as I probably needed to. Things in my life at the time had changed. I had other priorities or priorities I thought were priorities, and it shifted me away from a kind of prime component of who I am. And then you know, my career started, I taught for 10 years, got married, had my first child, and was not writing actively at the time. And then in 2012, I I had connected with somebody who I really admired on Twitter. I had kind of discovered social media and connected with Stephen Weber, who is an assistant superintendent out in, I guess, I think he's in Arkansas now. Before that, he was in North Carolina. And we had been talking a little bit about um, ways to connect literacy to the science classroom. I was a middle school science teacher when I was teaching in Chappaqua. And we had the opportunity to write together, to put together an article for an ASCD in-service piece, one of their online journals. And it reawakened in me a sense of why I needed to make this a part of my daily experience, why I couldn't walk away from writing like I had. I had such a great experience writing with Stephen that I knew I had to stay engaged in it. And so over the course of a number of years, I wrote a number of articles for NSTA, which is the National Science Teachers Association. I also had the chance to do some writing for ASCD. And I think one of the learnings for me was that, particularly as we think about writing, it makes sense to write from our strength, right? So we all have expertise. We all have areas that our life experiences have helped us to excel at. And so writing from those areas is really, really valuable. And what I also kind of learned throughout was that it made sense to expand our borders. I had the opportunity to not just write about education, but also write a little bit about some life experiences that I had growing up. And to do that, not just in educational periodicals, but in other periodicals too. And that also included doing some writing for New York-based publications. So ASCD, which is one of the large educational organizations, has affiliate groups at the state level, right? Just like many of the organizations we belong to have groups that operate on a state level too. And so I did some writing for the local affiliate of that organization, and put together a couple pieces that really spoke to the work I was doing at this point at BOCES, right? So it wasn't just about reflecting on my own life experiences. It was writing a little bit about some of the work that we were doing in our current curriculum department. And this, I share this all because there was a progression for me. It was kind of writing about, you know, getting some mentoring and support from Stephen, to writing from an area of strength, something I had really engaged in, to kind of expanding and trying to write outside of my area of science, to writing and talking a little bit about what our BOCES as an agency was doing, and then eventually to reaching a goal. And I've been lucky enough to write 2 books for ASCD. This was the first, which came out in 2016. And then just recently in 2020, a great friend and colleague who also was kind enough to jump in and join, Megan, and I wrote a book for ASCD that was published just in February of this year, called Forces of Influence. And so one of the amazing things for me has been I've been able to write for myself, and then also for my organization, right? It's been a really mutually beneficial way to balance a personal need and also connect it to the work that I'm doing for BOCES. And then 2, just finding ways to sustain that work, right? Because for me, I know it's important to me. I know it's something I have to do regularly. And I've been lucky enough to not only do some blogging on my own site, but also I blog monthly for an organization called SmartBrief, who SmartBrief puts out kind of daily news and blog information for a variety of different professions, education being one. So I think I share that with you not to toot my own horn. I hope it didn't come off like that at all. And instead it was to show a little bit about the progression that I took and how I went from a passion as a kid to kind of forgetting and not really giving the passion what it needed, to kind of finding a pathway to continue to grow in this area. And so what I wanted to share with you were some outlets that, as you think about the writing practice, and some of you may be at stages where you're already doing this type of writing. In other cases, some of you might be wondering, how do I get started if I want to engage in some writing as a reflective source? And then still others of you might be here just to engage in some writing together, which we'll do in a few minutes. So I want to share a couple outlets to think about if writing is an area that you want to embed into your work. And one of those outlets are blogs. And blogs are really kind of the least structured of ways to express your writing to other people, right? I mean, we can certainly keep a journal, right, or a diary or a notebook or whatever we want to call it, and that's unstructured writing that's really just for us, right? When we do any type of blogging, it can still be really unstructured, right? There's no formalized process. Often you write about whatever's on your mind, and you're still writing for yourself. Blogs are generally meant to be really reflective, but you also have to recognize that because blogs tend to live digitally, there's also an audience as well, right? And the people who will be reading it will be reading your reflections as a way to connect to their own growth and learning. So it's recognized that blogs are meant to be informal and are also meant to be really emotional, right? People are speaking from their own experiences when blogging. You can start your own. There are a number of sites, where you can get things started. You can use Wix, you can use Squarespace. The site itself doesn't necessarily matter. It can be formalized and used like as a template, as a background. It can also be something that literally lives on just a text-intensive site, and that's it. Because with a blog, usually, while you're open to people reading it, you're not necessarily writing for other people specifically. It's about you expressing yourself, or the author expressing what the author wants to say. But it also can be managed by an organization. For instance, I mentioned SmartBrief. SmartBrief, they have their own original blog posts. Sometimes they curate material from other resources, but they also have their own where people blog on a regular basis for them. And that's kind of where I do my blogging for SmartBrief. Other sites you might have heard of, Edutopia. Edutopia is a site with regular blogs where people who are interested can submit ideas to be included. Education Week. Education Week has a number of different blogs across different areas of education. And when you're writing for blogs that are managed by other organizations, there may be some rules there, but usually it's pretty flexible and free, including the word length. You know, sometimes blogs are really short, other times they can be incredibly long. And for some of you who do a lot of online reading, you know, there are a number of long read sites like Medium, more will come to me, but where, you know, the blogs are as long as full-length articles, but because of the informal nature and how they're written, they're still really blog pieces as opposed to articles. So another way to engage is through articles themselves, right? And articles often have rules that are set by that outlet or organization. You know, for those of you who, even if you do writing for your own organization, right? Like Our BOCES, there are some rules for Our Reporter, which goes out from time to time. If you work in a school system and you have a student paper or journal, there are likely some rules that play a role in how those articles get published. But basically, when you're writing an article as opposed to a blog, you're writing for a specific audience of that outlet, right? So if you were writing for educational leadership, you would recognize that you were writing for educators, many of whom are building or district leaders. You know, if you were writing for the New York Times, right, you would be writing for readers of the Times who are primarily people who live in the New York City metro area, right, and who happen to think along a centrist to liberal line, right? So like those are just some things that you start to think about when you move from blogging to writing an article. Sometimes articles are done purely voluntary. Other times honoraria are involved where people are compensated for writing articles. It all depends on the outlet. But generally, they're managed by an outside organization, which means that you'll have rules you'll need to follow, one of which is often word length. Most articles that go to educational periodicals tend to be like anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 words generally, depending on who the organization is and what the purpose of the article is. And sometimes people are invited to write articles, but most of the time you submit a manuscript or you know, a draft for review prior to publication. That's usually a little different from a blog, which might get a quick read over, but isn't really scrutinized in the same way. So some outlets around the education sphere are ASCD, Pi Delta Kappa, the Harvard Business Review. Even though that's a business periodical, there are a lot of connections to the education world. And then New York State School Administrator Association, SANES, right? All of those have journals with articles attached. And then lastly is the book category. And again, there's not necessarily a progression here for everybody. It all depends on the type of writing that you're interested in exploring or doing. And so For books, the process is the most complicated, simply because books take the most time to bring to fruition for the writers and the organization who is sponsoring it. Like with articles, there are set rules and you're writing for an audience. With writing of books, there are contracts and legal elements involved, as well as compensation. And usually, for most books, the writing's going to be 10,000 words and up, right? So the first book I wrote was about 10,000 words. The book that I just finished with Megan was about 50,000. So those numbers may equate to a certain kind of page length or idea for you, but you know, every 10,000 words or so is probably about 40 pages if you were to think about the length of things, right? So from very small books all the way to much larger. And again, here are some options, and they're all very different depending on the type of book you might want to write. ASCD is they publish as well as their own organization. Corwin, if you've read any of Corwin's books, Corwin is a book producer. They also provide professional learning opportunities. Ion Education is a smaller book producer located in the Westchester region. Dave Burgess Consulting and Times 10 are small book publishers that tend to be quicker around publication and sometimes publish shorter books. And then, of course, what's not up here is the opportunity to publish your own, right? So if you want to make your own rules, you can use a organization like Amazon and have your own book published, right? And go through the self-published route. So I want to take a quick break before we do some writing on our own, and just turn it over to the group for any questions. Anybody wondering about elements of the writing process, curious about writing outlets, or have any questions that you want to ask. And if you do, I might ask that you just go into the participants window. Okay, you'll see that you have the option to raise your hand, right? You can kind of go over find your name in the participant list, and you should have an option to raise your hand. And then I can call on you, or you can just type it in the chat. If there's anything specific you have a question about before we do some writing as a group. Great. So I'm going to share again, and if you have any questions, feel free to share them as we go. But I thought it would be really nice, just reshare. I thought it would be really nice to do some writing together, because writing for me is cathartic. It's a really nice way to stay connected with myself. And I've got a number of prompts that I'm sharing that I'm going to ask you to think about. And then we'll take some time to write on our own and do some sharing and some review. And so here are the 4 prompts. You should be able to see them now. So, and they're all meant to be reflective. So that first one, what educational philosophy has guided your work since you entered the profession? So if you can think to one foundational idea, okay, what has it been? You know, what have you as an educator, or if you're no longer an educator and working in some other element of the field, what philosophy has really guided you in your work? The second one, why do you do what you do? what keeps you plugging ahead, um, not only in the circumstance we're in currently, but also just day to day. Why do you do it? Then that third question, what was a career turning point for you and what did you learn? Right? We all have our experiences that um, sometimes we think of them as kind of rock bottom moments, right? Where there's something really challenging happens and it charts the course for us moving forward. But other times it's a relationship that helps us kind of grow dramatically. Sometimes it's an experience we have, it could be travel, but what was something that shifted your trajectory and what did you learn from it? And then lastly, 10 years ago, where did you see yourself today? So if you were to go back 10 years ago and you are now your past you, okay, where did you think you'd be at this moment? And how accurate was your prediction? I mean, are you pretty spot on? Is this entirely different for you? And so what I'd ask you to do is give yourself, and you can write, however you want. If you're comfortable, um, if you want to walk away from the screen and write on paper first, feel free. If you're comfortable just writing at your computer, feel free to do that. But what we're going to do in about 10 minutes, okay, and think about the prompt you want, really dive into the prompt, reflect deeply on it, kind of force yourself to write about that prompt for a good 10 minutes. What we'll do in 10 minutes is we're actually going to break up into pairs. And I'll come back to this slide and I'll leave it up here so you can look at it. But I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing in a couple minutes. In about 10 minutes, I'll pair you up with another colleague from our session. Okay, and what I'm going to do is assign pairs of people to breakout spaces. I'll send you to a breakout room. Okay, and once there, what I'm going to ask you to do, right? And so if you're going to write by hand, okay, you're going to need to provide some time to make it available digitally. But what I'm going to ask you to do is make your writing available digitally to a partner, right? So you can do this by plugging your writing, either starting on a Google Doc or plugging it into a Google Doc, right? And then just sharing the link in your breakout room with your partner, okay? Making it available so they can go on and view it. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is, just as a pair, decide who's going to go first. Both partners read that piece silently. And if you are, even if you're the person who wrote it, okay, reread what you wrote, and your partner is going to read it too. And then the writer is going to share their thinking behind what they've written. Okay, so it says the writer shares the thinking behind, it should say their writing, not their writer. Okay, and then their partner will share some warm and cool feedback and then switch. Okay, so it's a quick reading of what we came up with, a quick feedback gathering and sharing, and then we'll switch back and forth, right? So you'll have the opportunity to write a little bit, to get some feedback and get a sense of how your piece came across to people who are reading it. And then we'll have the opportunity to share back and forth. So this isn't an evaluation. There's no grading, but we are opening up our writing for other people to say what it made them think of and what they wondered about. Right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is give yourself about 10 minutes or so to do some writing, okay, around either of the prompts or any of the prompts that are of interest to you. Yep, happy to put that up there. Okay, so here are the prompts. Pick a prompt that speaks to you. Give yourself some time to write. I've got 2:33 now. At around 2:40, 2:40, 2:45-ish. Okay, we'll bring everybody back, and then we'll put ourselves into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes and come back with a few minutes at the end to just debrief. So pick a prompt, okay? Get yourself kind of set with whatever writing tool you want to use. And then you can feel free to write for some time and then pop it into a Google Doc. And I'll call everybody back in a little under 10 minutes. So I know for me, I can sometimes continue to go on writing for a significant period of time, but wherever you are, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to assign us to breakout spaces. And let me just do this real quick. And what I'm going to ask you to do is share what you've written so far. Okay. And then from there, take some time to talk about it, share some feedback with your partner, and then switch roles. And we'll come back in about, if everybody takes 3 or 4 minutes, then we can pop back a little after, a little less than 10 to 3 and take a few minutes to just kind of debrief together. So I'm going to try this and see if I can send us to breakout spaces. So let's see. All right, let me see if this works. And I think it will. All right, hold on 1 second. That looks good. All right, and I think we're going to have one room with 3 people. So if you're in the room of 3, you might just have to do a quicker round robin as best you can of sharing. So let me open up the spaces and I'll send you there right now. Okay, so you should have a message to join a breakout space. And if you click that, you should be able to hop into that room. So Rosie, Paul, Rosa, or Annie, if you're in the room, in the main room, and want to join the breakout room, that would be great. Hey, Naheem, I saw that you had gone to one of the breakout rooms, and I just went over to join you. If your audio works and you want to share your writing, anything you put together, we can either go into one of the breakout rooms, or if you want to share it or are comfortable sharing it here, you can do that as well.
I had stepped away.
Oh, no problem.
You give Did you give a prompt for us to write?
I did. Here, hold on. Let me see. I can copy them. And I'm happy to share what I put together. Hold on. I'll screen share. There we go. Okay, let me just share this up. So here we're.
I have to say, I was really shocked to find somebody else that loved Red Rising.
Oh yeah, I know. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Pierce Brown is the man.
So I haven't read beyond the first trilogy. I know that he wrote
Gold, and I think something.
Yeah. But I haven't gotten that far yet, but I loved the first three.
Yeah, they're awesome. I'm almost done with the second one. I'm gonna start with the third one.
Awesome. Yeah, you'll love it. So for me, so these were the prompts we had taken a quick look at, but for me, I had chosen to write about that last one. And if I reflect back on where I was 10 years ago and where I imagined I would be today, it would probably be as a building principal. And originally I thought my educational career would take kind of like the normal trajectory of, classroom teacher, assistant principal, principal. And then I kind of came across the BOCES structure and model, and first spent time providing science support for this region of New York State, and then moved into professional learning coordination and now directing the department. So it's been a very different trajectory than I thought I would have taken. There are elements that I miss significantly. I miss not working with kids on a daily basis, but I love working with adult learners and working with teachers and principals, assistant superintendents. I think that putting together really impactful professional learning is really hard work, and it's really important work. And so it's a great role, and it's work that I relish, but definitely not something I would have thought would have been my pathway 10 years ago.
I think that last question hits deep for me too. Look, I don't know how, but me and myself 10 years ago, I was 18. So
yeah,
there's a lot of things I would in this 10-year span. And as everyone says, they would do a lot of things differently. But wow. I'd say my prediction was half accurate. And in the sense of it being half accurate, I can attain the other half. I just have to go back and retrace a few steps of a couple of years and master that before I could go forward with the other half.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about pathways, right? And the pathways we've taken, right? And why we've chosen to go in those directions. And then how, whether we thought those were the pathways we would take, or whether they're totally new and different and unexpected, what we learned from them, right? And how, like you were saying, how then it helps us figure out, like, do we need to retrace a path or two, in order to keep moving forward? Are we really like out in the weeds from where we thought we needed to be? And sometimes do we need to like walk back to that main path, or like, are we cool being out in the weeds, right? And it's like all good. So I think that reflecting though and thinking back to the decisions we've made, sometimes it's really hard. I know I have a couple decisions from my life where I wonder how things would have been different if I would have done certain things, and sometimes that's like tough to think about. But I also think that's like empowering on some level, right? And helps us figure out, is this a direction we want to keep going in? You know,
Yes, or need the closure.
that's right.
Because look, you've been writing and you took a path off of writing, but you drew back to the path.
Right. That's right. All right. So,
I'm
yeah.
going back to the path too, but as I draw back to the path, I find myself being highly creative.
Yeah.
Uh,
I lost you, Naheem. The audio seemed to cut out.
oh,
Yep. Okay. Now I got you.
yeah. What was the last thing you heard?
Well, that you've drawn back to the path.
Yeah. And when I draw back to the path, I just found myself being highly creative. Like, I made music.
I lost you again, Naheem. Sorry about that. So, hey, everybody, welcome back. I hope that you had an opportunity to do some sharing and to chat a little bit about your writing and to really kind of explore elements of those prompts and how you wrote and what was kind of impactful for you. It's for me, writing is a really valuable process, and one of the things that I wish I had more time to do, and that I think sessions like this can help with, is to force myself to do some of that. And so while you were in your breakout spaces, Naheem and I were talking a little bit about that last prompt. And for me, I'll share that I never would have expected myself to be in the role I'm in now. 10 years ago, I thought I'd follow a really traditional leadership track in education and be an assistant principal and go on that way. Um, and at the same time, I've loved the fact that this has been a surprising pathway for me to follow and wasn't in any way um, traditional. And I was talking to Naheem about how it's helped me become comfortable kind of looking back on some of the decisions that I've made, like some that were great and some that were not so, like in both professionally and personally. And looking at those decisions and sometimes asking, like, what if, can be really challenging sometimes to think about, but also really empowering too, right? And so, what writing does for me is it lets me work through those ideas. And so, I find I actually like to write on paper. When if I'm reflecting, I like the feel of a pen or pencil in my hand to write. I don't get that same feel when I'm typing. I think because my fingers move sometimes faster than my mind does. I know that's kind of weird, but so the actual writing by hand and thinking through some of the things I've experienced is really powerful and helpful. So, one thing I want to share with all of you is my hope would be that for um, for the foreseeable future, that for those of you who are interested in writing and like the time to force yourself to write, that you'll be comfortable coming together if we do some writing on a weekly basis. And next time, I'll work through a number of prompts, and we can devote some time not only to writing and sharing in small groups, but then also come back and do some sharing with the larger group. And I think if people are interested in this as a brain break, as a way to do some reflecting, I think what I'd ultimately love would be after the next time that we meet, um, to turn over the facilitation or the creation of the prompts to somebody else, because I think that just as you know from working with students or adults or whatever aspect of education you're involved with, and coming up with answers and reflections is great, and at the same time, coming out up with really kind of intriguing questions is sometimes even more powerful, right? And for me, thinking on really tough questions, you know, is part of the fun, not only of what we do in education, but just about life in general. So I'm going to thank you for joining the session today, and for giving me an hour of your time and joining me to write a little bit on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. I hope that you get the chance to enjoy the day, and spend a little bit of time sitting outside and reflecting, and maybe even getting in some additional writing time beyond our short bit of time today. So I hope to see you next week, and I hope you'll continue to do some writing along with me. And I want to wish you a great rest of the afternoon.